The Dark Souls series is a classic in gaming culture. I wasn't interested in them when they were originally releasing, but I've tried them out in late 2020 and got hooked. Since then, I've beaten each Dark Souls game more times than I can count. And since Elden Ring had come out, I have sank 3 playthroughs into this massive game. Therefore, I can confidently say they are some of my favorite I've ever played. The bosses in these games is really what keeps me coming back. When I feel like I want to replay a game, I usually think of fighting some of my favorite bosses. That being said, to reach those good bosses, one must also power through some not so great ones. Now, I have something to say about every one of them, so I was inspired to make this video. The Soulsborne family of games have fairly specific mannerisms to them. To me, they are games about commitment. Any action you can perform has some limitations and drawbacks, such as locking you into an animation or consuming a resource. This includes combat, and enemies are generally subject to the same limitations as the player. For example, their attacks are limited to a specific set of moves, with differing wind-up times, damage values, and recovery periods. This means fighting enemies generally consists of recognizing your and the adversary's moveset, timing your attacks and rolls, positioning yourself relative to the enemy, and balancing the use of your health, stamina, and limited use items. Before we begin, I would like to lay out some groundwork on how I will go about this, and what I think constitutes a good boss. Firstly, I will judge them mostly based off how they fight the melee character. This is because the hand-to-hand combat in the Dark Souls games feels the most mechanically complex, it's subjectively the most fun, and also how I believe they were designed to be fought. Ranged characters can do fisticuffs, but knight characters cannot do pew-pews. Therefore, I think this is the most important thing a boss has to get right. Furthermore, I believe the vast majority of bosses are designed to be fought solo, without summons. Anyone who has played the games can tell that summoning NPCs or players decreases the difficulty of the fight by several times over. When bosses are confronted with multiple enemies, the only thing their AI can do is to alternate between ignoring each enemy to fight just one of them, as if they were the only ones present. This means you can beat many fights by summoning, while barely engaging with what the bosses are doing. Given what I've laid out so far, I can begin to formulate what makes for a good boss. The most important aspects for me are as follows. Firstly, the visual and auditory tells, or telegraphs, before an attack even lands, should allow players to recognize exactly what he is about to do immediately following this telegraph. Secondly, this telegraph should give players a reasonable amount of time to prepare for avoiding the attack. Thirdly, the best movesets are those where the telegraphs alone are enough to vaguely intuit what the boss will be doing, even if it's your first time seeing this. Finally, if the boss has some kind of gimmick to them, this gimmick should still require some effort to pull off and not trivialize the entire encounter. With that out of the way, let's start discussing the specifics of the first game in the series. My general feelings towards the boss lineup of Dark Souls 1 can be summed up as not great. There are several major issues that I find make boss fights range from somewhat enjoyable to highly frustrating. Rolling through attacks can be very inconsistent due to many lingering hitboxes. Furthermore, many melee weapons are solid and will push you around, even if you're in the middle of a roll, so you will get snagged by the blade and take damage when your roll is over. Many bosses have very limited movesets, and many moves have extremely short telegraphs or have similar telegraphs to each other. I don't believe any broad general boss type that's in Dark Souls 1 has not been done better in later games. That being said, there are some absolute classics. A quick disclaimer before we begin, Dark Souls 1 was actually the last game in the series that I played in order. Some people will feel this might make me unfairly biased because I do have many bad things to say, so I thought I'd get this out of the way. The first challenge of the game, and one of the more unique fights as well, the Asylum Demon, is a decent way to introduce new players into the combat of Dark Souls. It's hard to talk about the boss without considering the entire sequence, because you're not supposed to beat him initially. When the player first walks into the room, they just have a broken sword, which deals next to no damage. You read a message on the ground that tells you to GTFO, so you make it through the open doorway and it closes behind you. A bit of a detour follows, in which you collect your starting equipment, as well as the Estus Flask, and even the first major plot point, by talking with your first friendly NPC, Oscar of Astora. Then you are right back above the ugly bastard, plunging a club into its brain. You then have to deal with less than half its initial health, using a weapon that can kill stuff. The moveset isn't half bad. He has a small variety of hammer strikes, and a highly telegraphed butt slam attack. None of the attacks are unfair, but there isn't much for him to stand out either. The butt slam is a bit too easy to exploit. It's the only way he can respond to you poking his massive buns. I also don't understand why the devs decided to put so much emphasis on the plunging attack. It's satisfying to do, but it might give players a false impression of how useful and important this ability is across the bosses, because only one more boss is equally susceptible to this. The hammer attacks are smooth to dodge and are telegraphed well enough. If you're a clever bugger, you could also pick the Black Firebomb starting gift to mount the sucker the first time round, and get a cool reward. You still have to go around though. So overall, the entire sequence is a very good introductory experience, but the boss enemy itself leaves a lot to be desired. Fine introduction and a bit of a skill check for new players, but nothing too extreme. I'm gonna put him up here. Dark Souls really likes its demon bosses, huh? When you first enter onto the bridge, you will be getting shot at by archers atop the tower you entered through. This directs your attention to this elevated ground, which can be used to set up another plunging attack. The boss itself jumps down onto the bridge when you've walked about halfway through. Once this little dance is done with, we are again left with a pretty limited moveset of about 3 or 4 individual strikes. There aren't any combos that I remember. The axe strikes on the ground seem to leave some sort of delayed shockwave, so dodging them usually results in getting hit anyway. This makes the boss awkward to fight, as backing off is essentially your only strategy of avoiding a beating. In this case it's not too bad, but this problem persists through a lot of Dark Souls 1. The blade itself is solid too, so it will drag you around or block your movement, which doesn't feel like a polished game experience. The arena is pretty narrow. It's barely wide enough for the player character to walk by the monster. As a result, he can get you stuck in the entrance doorway, which also seems a bit unfair. However, I don't inherently have a problem with limiting the player's movement. I think in some cases it can add a lot to a fight. But it seems a bit excessive to restrict you so much on your second boss of the game. Compared to most DS1 bosses, he doesn't have too many glaring issues, but I can't say he is all that memorable of a fight either. I sure hope this boss isn't lazily reused en masse later. Foreshadowing. This one is an icon of the series. The design of the gargoyles is quite derivative, but the fight is exciting. First, only one gargoyle will charge you. This enemy has got a long weapon and can use various techniques in hand-to-hand combat, but it can also use its wings to fly around you or even plunge right down onto you. When the first gargoyle reaches about half health, a second one will appear, and now we have the first 2-on-1 fight in the series. The second gargoyle will be more partial to breathing fire from a distance, but either one can do both styles of fight. This is very interesting because the player must constantly keep in mind 2 different enemies, usually doing 2 completely different things. Dodging an axe strike and moving out of the way of a stream of fire to finally get in some damage is demanding but satisfying. With 2 enemies to focus on instead of 1, the player will need to pay close attention to what both of them are doing. Dodging just one attack is not enough, because the other one might already be attacking as well. Therefore, you must be clever with your positioning and careful with your dodges, so that you can find safe openings to attack. You have a bit of time before the second gargoyle appears, so you might be able to wear down the first one before that happens. But you have to know it's coming in the first place. Killing this first gargoyle makes the fight a lot easier, but it teaches the player that sometimes being able to dish out a lot of damage in a short amount of time can be very helpful. This fight is an early game climax taking place on the roof of a dilapidated church, and marks the first point of major plot progression, as the reward for beating them is ringing the first bell of awakening. You can actually hear the bell ringing occasionally when you're around this area. This means some player has just rung the bell in their world. I didn't know this when I first played, so I was a bit confused on why I need to ring the bell if it keeps ringing all the time anyway. The fight is exciting and a precursor to many fantastic duo fights later in the series. I really do not have anything bad to say about it, it's that good. It's going straight to the top so far. This guy here is pretty infamous for embodying some really bad tropes of Dark Souls boss design. As soon as you enter, he will usually do a jumping attack, leaving you just enough time to dodge if you are expecting it. But if you aren't, then you are in for a beatdown. Even if you manage to avoid the first attack, you will realize there are actually two dogs charging at you the moment you step foot through the gate. And even if you dodge their initial attacks, you will look around in horror, realizing the arena is about the size of my will to live. The only saving grace is this staircase leading to nowhere in the corner. Climbing it will help you with separating the enemies and taking out the dogs before the Capra Demon actually reaches you. If you manage to do all that, you will realize the boss enemy itself is pretty easy. He only has a few melee attacks with his machetes, which are all well telegraphed, and there are no janky hitboxes. He's also pretty slow, potentially to compensate for the dogs and arena. This means the opening 10-ish seconds of the fight is what determines if you will be successful. These factors combined make for a very frustrating experience. That being said, at least it seems like the devs have learned going forward, and I can't think of any boss this egregious in the same aspects. The boss enemy itself is pretty simple to fight, so this phase of the battle is not that exciting nor annoying. The dogs and arena gave me a ton of trouble on my first playthrough, and this has really soured my opinion on this boss. I sure hope we don't have to see him again. Foreshadowing. When you started the game off, you probably thought this big demon behind the bars is the Asylum Demon, but it's actually a completely different and unique type of enemy called Stray Demon. It's possible to return to the Asylum doing a somewhat convoluted sequence of actions. The place is a bit different now, the layout is the same, but there are different enemies, plus you have access to slightly more zones. As you walk over the Asylum Demon arena, the floor will collapse, and you will fall down into the chamber where the first demon originally was. Firstly, you have to take a not insignificant amount of damage when you fall down, which feels a bit cheap. Secondly, and more importantly, we've already fought this guy. Sure, his weapon looks a bit different, but his moveset is almost identical. The only differences that I can tell are that the downward axe slam now does a magical explosion, and he has one new attack which just feels janky and unfair. He will do a move with his weapon, as if he was hitting something above you, but after a split second, this will create the same explosion in front of him. How did any of this make sense? The new AoEs are hard to gauge on where they start and end. They are not momentary damage boxes, but rather a sort of expanding sphere. It can be very hard to read where the upper shockwave will appear, because it's basically just an arbitrary point in space relative to the demon. Next, you can access this area basically as soon as you reach the church with the gargoyles, but the power of the enemies here feels more appropriate for someone at least post Quelaag. But I don't really know why someone would just decide to come here at this arbitrary point in the game. This means the guy has a lot of health and two-shots you if you come here early. A side effect of this that I've experienced on this run-through is that he loved the slam down attack and would sometimes lock himself into doing it over and over again. I've counted some of the more egregious streaks, and they are on screen right now. But just because those streaks were broken doesn't mean he was otherwise all that creative either. He would break these long slam down combos with the butt slam, and I didn't count this, but I'd estimate 95% of what he did was either of these two options, and I don't think I'm exaggerating either. So what can I say? A boring rehash with barely any change, and a more jank than it had before. Sorry mate, but you're going straight down. He's been reused once, so surely we won't have to see him again. Foreshadowing. The best I could say about this boss is to praise the unique visual design. Its form is unlike any dragon design I've seen, and the body horror is about as far as the series has ever gone. The massive gaping ribcage looks extremely unnatural. When it moves around, you will also notice a colorful shimmer on its scales, which I don't remember being used on any other dragon in the game. One of his attacks is to spill out a huge puddle of disgusting looking bile. This fight shares a problem with the Taurus Demon, of getting hit by attacks you've already dodged. It's either getting snagged by his moving limbs while rolling, or some sort of lingering hitbox when it slams the ground. The charge attack sets a precedent for similar moves in the series, of being poorly telegraphed and being very wide. Merely being near him gets you hurt, even if it doesn't look like he's hitting you, and if you do back off, you kinda just have to wait until it's done charging before you can do anything. The size of its health makes for a tediously long fight when it's only able to do 5 or 6 moves, so it gets repetitive, but I do appreciate the sentiment of making the bosses a bit spongier, as the early ones were a bit squishy for my taste. Many of these problems get carried over to further dragon fights in the series, even if you don't necessarily consider this a traditional dragon encounter. The fight isn't really any more grueling than previous bosses, but the more I fight this boss, the less polished it feels. I cannot say I ever look forward to fighting this guy anymore. Following the trend from previously, here's another beautifully designed enemy with a majestic music track we haven't heard yet. When we walk into the boss room, it will do some vague movement towards the ground, like a descending silver chrome UFO, possibly. I don't really know how else to put it. It will then fly around on either side of the bridge. And if you happen to be a melee-based character, you must now stand around doing nothing for minutes at a time until it's done shooting magic projectiles and will sit down on the side, allowing you to get some hits in. When it's done, it will create an explosion and fly away again. This enemy appears later in the Crystal Cave zone and it has a slightly different color, but there it somehow does even less and will sit around idly if you don't walk up and attack. They do make for some fancy wall decorations though, so we might be able to call this the first spectacle boss of the series we've seen. Also, sometimes its tail will bug out and flash around, which at least looks slightly funny. But now we have to get to the fight itself. Am I even fighting the boss if all I'm doing is avoiding projectiles first, and then wailing on a static wall later? Sometimes it doesn't even feel like it's trying to kill me. The fight leaves a lot to be desired, and many builds will be forced to play very passively, and just dodging the projectiles every once in a while, and then stand around to deal some damage. It doesn't help that it will only alternate between two different attacks for most of the time, and they both have a similar looking windup, with this glowing orb turning into the projectiles. There is a third attack which comes out so rarely that I forgot it even exists, and I got caught off in the footage. But really it's just another variation on a magic projectile. It doesn't matter much since all of them are almost harmless, but the resulting fight is quite static and boring, so I cannot give him many points, nor do I have all that much to say. This here R/Chonker is guarding the grave of Sir Artorias the Abysswalker, a legendary knight who was laid to rest in this honorable place. It's a big wolf with a big sword. The dog does combos with a sword in his mouth. This fight is something else at this point in the game. Despite being a beast-sized enemy, the attacks you dodge are more akin to a swordsman. Sif does not have any attacks to hit you when you're underneath him, but he will usually try to leap away to make some distance. This creates a unique dynamic where you must avoid one or two attacks, then you get under him to attack yourself, then he jumps away, and you must approach him again and you must dodge another attack to be allowed to strike. This doesn't get tedious because Sif wants to approach you, and he's not slow. In fact, he has some attacks that close the distance too. I struggled to avoid this upward slash he does to close the gap, which comes out a bit faster than I always expect. I'm surprised they managed to make this seemingly silly boss work. Sif even changes his animations when he gets low on health, and starts limping and skulking around. Unfortunately, his glaring vulnerability makes the fight feel not that exciting, but it is very functional, and provides an interesting dynamic that we haven't seen before or since really. As a side note, I really don't understand why some people treat this fight like it's some mega sad moment of the series. I mean, you've probably killed hundreds of humans by now, hollow or otherwise, potentially even a dragon or two, but killing one dog is where you draw the line? I never really understood why people feel this way. This character right here has some big assets. I bet she has a really great personality, you know. One could even go as far as saying she's got a massive set of honking bedonkers mommy milkers. Jokes aside, we've got another banger on our hands. The spider part of the monster has different attacks which cover swathes of the arena in lava, which in effect dynamically alters the shape of the arena, determining where you can and can't go. This part of the body can also do some small explosions by dancing around with its legs. But on top of that, we have the lady herself with a flaming sword that magically extends in a flash when she's attacking. She's got some crazy range on that thing, and the flashes before she strikes make for very intuitive tells on when she's about to swing. The moveset on this boss is genuinely the largest on what we've seen so far, with various cinematic looking sword strikes, coupled with the added complexity of the lava on the ground and some other curveballs. This might be the most dynamic fight so far. She's got some health to her name, but the fight never feels like it drags on, due to the sheer variety of what this baddie can do. The only real problems I have are A. She has an AoE explosion, which feels a bit poorly telegraphed. First, her human body will sort of swoon over downwards, and this is what you must react to if you want to have time to run away. And then just before the explosion, the spider will do some frantic movements, which feel a bit more like a proper telegraph, but by this point it's too late to run away. It's okay that you have to pay attention to the human body, but what she actually does is not exactly an intuitive tell for a big devastating explosion. And B. Her sword thrust looks a bit vague because a lot of fire effects start overlapping, so it's hard to gauge on when the attack comes and where exactly her sword is. But other than those small annoyances, we might have the most creative and complex boss so far. Beating her even marks the next major point of progression by ringing the second bell of awakening. You get a cutscene showing you the big gate you've seen earlier by the church has been opened, giving you your next objective. Instant classic. This guy is a bit of a doozy, to be honest. The arena is a very long walkway on the side of a rock face. As you go around the corner, the full scale of this guy is revealed, and he is hulking alright. He is one of, if not the biggest boss in the game, and he's just standing there looking at you. His design on the top of his body, with the tentacles and the flying runes, is very evocative of his sister, whom we just killed 1 minute ago. As you approach the end of the walkway, you will see a small shrine with a corpse on it. When you pick up the gold-hemmed armor set, Ceaseless will become enraged, tear his arm off, and now the fight begins. The regular way to fight him is to stand around on the cliff and either pelt him with projectiles or wait until he slams his arm next to you and wail on him. This method of fight is genuinely really grueling, and he only has like 2 attacks. He can slam his arm down, or do a weird fire laser beam, which isn't telegraphed clearly either. But the hitboxes for his arm attack are seriously egregious. They feel about twice as big as his arm actually is. He's got a ton of health to him too, so the fight is frustrating, boring, and has nothing exciting going for it. I did not take any footage of me doing him this way, because I've done that once in the past, and it was pain. The cheese method is that if you run all the way back to the start, he will leap at the cliff face and cling on, being completely unable to do anything. And hitting him just a few times with any weapon will immediately kill him. This is because he's stuck hanging over a big drop. However, this will only work if he has torn his arm off. When you enter first time round, he will do it immediately when you pick up the rope set. This will actually kill you if you start running back at once, because this move deals damage. If you did happen to have died and enter the boss arena again, he will approach the entrance immediately without tearing off his arm, so the cheese won't work. You actually need to lure him all the way back to vaguely where he starts. Only then will he commit amputation, and then you need to run all the way back to actually kill him. This boss is frustrating if you don't know how the cheese works, and really easy when you do. I usually come here right after killing Quelaag, because it's such an easy bounty of souls while I'm down there anyway. Fighting him normally really is up there when it comes to janky and shitty Dark Souls bosses. You're going right down into the sewers, fucko. We've got another certified hood classic, my friends. After making your way all the way up this hulking and dark tower full of tricks and traps, this big guy is all that's standing between you and reaching Anor Londo, this massive city that you've been seeing looming over everywhere you've gone in Lordran. The way he looks and moves really gives him a feeling of a massive metal machine with strength for days. The arena we must fight him on is a fairly narrow walkway, which you could easily fall off if you're not careful or use to your advantage. The attacks from the Golem have the precision of a swordsman, but come from directions you would expect from a beast boss. He is so much taller than you, and yet he never has trouble hitting the player. Many of his attacks will knock you off your legs and maybe off the ledge too, resulting in an instant death. He even has a grab attack where he literally throws you like a ragdoll. I appreciate trying to add additional hazards for complexity, but it feels a bit too punishing in my opinion. Maybe if you would get knocked down onto some platform below, where you take additional fall damage, or maybe there's a poison pool down there and then you have to make your way back up. I think that might feel a bit more fair. However, you can use this against the boss too. When you start fighting, you will notice he's got some health to his name, and there's a reason for that. Once you deal enough damage to him, he will falter and lose balance. This lasts many seconds and he's helpless during this time, so you can and should wail on him. If you deal enough damage during this falter state, he will fall over backwards completely, giving you an even bigger opening for damage. If he started the falter state with his back towards the ledge, he will completely fall off after you hit him enough times, letting you use your own weakness against him, proving once and for all that the hardest boss in Dark Souls is gravity. Now, standing around hitting a static wall is not the most exciting thing ever, but the fact that you have to earn your opening, and the possibility of insta-killing the hulking robot, combined with how the opportunities are interlaced with an actual fight, make this so much more interesting than the Moonlight Butterfly. There are a few sus hitboxes here and there, but the fight is quite enjoyable, unique and mostly engaging. I like it. And the reward for beating the sucker is getting airlifted to the beautiful city of the gods, Anor Londo. The Royal Guards, the dynamic duo, the quick and thick, the double team, the gangbang, the bastards. They go by many names. They are legendary, they are iconic, and they will fuck you up. This boss fight is widely considered the hardest in the base game, and I agree with that. The battle takes place in a big rectangular arena with 2 rows of solid columns. The 2 start on the opposite end, and you will have to fight them both at the same time. Getting close to both of them at once is suicide. Smough's thick sides will get you blocked from one side, and his attacks will knock you down if you don't have 1,000,000 poise. And due to the fairly slow roll in Dark Souls 1, it's impossible to consistently dodge two different skilled attackers. That's why separating the two is the dynamic for this fight. Smough gets stuck on the pillars often, and Ornstein has a fast and long-range dash attack. This imbalance is what gives you a chance. However, you will have to always keep the other in your peripheral vision, as your windows to attack are not very long. You must also be very strict with your timing of attacks for the same reason. Getting hit usually gives the other an opening to close the gap and join in. Either character would be competent in an individual boss fight, but the two have been designed to be fought together, and as a result the entire sequence is exciting, chaotic, and very enjoyable. Ornstein is using a sword spear, and his moves are similar to what you expect of other swordsmen. He's got a decent variety of direct attacks in different directions, and on top of that he has a ranged homing lightning bolt attack and the fast dash mentioned earlier. Smough really likes to use a charge into swipe combo, and his other hammer attacks are fairly basic. Once you kill one of the two, a cutscene will play, and the remaining champion will absorb the other's power. This means the second phase is wildly different, based on who you kill first, and means that it's pointless to wear them down together, and instead it's better to focus on one of them. Super Smough is a bit bigger than initially, but his moveset is largely the same. He gets a new Butt Slam Lightning AoE, which seems pretty scary, and it is quite dangerous, but you can actually roll through it in some circumstances. Smough was already much bigger than you, so the bigger size doesn't affect the fight much. Super Ornstein, on the other hand, gets essentially an entirely new moveset. His growth makes him almost as big as the Iron Golem, but the spear is a lot harder to keep track of than the axe. Some of his attacks are also a bit hard to gauge on when the damage box activates and deactivates. Super Ornstein feels a bit more janky than Super Smough. In the end, you obtain the soul of the character you kill last. While I like the twist of variability in the second phase, unfortunately Ornstein is widely agreed to be the easiest to kill initially, and Super Smough is the easier of the two options. So there isn't really any reason to choose the inverse order, unless you really want Ornstein's soul, I guess. The only major problem I have with this fight is that Ornstein's dash attack can be very glitchy. If he gets caught on a pillar, he will slowly slide off one side, and then instantly get all his speed back. Sometimes he will even transition back to his default stance, and then instantly snap back to his dashing animation. This means if you didn't happen to catch the start of his dash, you are faced with potentially a very fast attack that comes out with basically zero telegraph. But other than that, this fight is a fantastic challenge, and easily the best fight in base game Dark Souls 1 in my opinion. Though that might say a bit more about the other bosses than it does about our dynamic duo. Still a classic and imitated to this day. There is a reason duo boss fights in RPGs are always compared to Ornstein and Smough. After we get the Lord Vessel, the last goal before the final boss is to collect the Lord Souls mentioned in the intro. This means we need to kill 4 different bosses in different areas of the game, and we can take them in basically any order. The 4 kings are technically accessible as soon as you kill Sif, but their difficulty is certainly scaled for late game. The other 3 big bosses are unlocked by dispelling the golden fog gates once you place the Lord Vessel at the altar. I usually incidentally go for Seath first, just because I want to do Sigmar's questline and I need to free Sieglinde in the Garden of the Duke's Archives, but once I'm there I realize that I might as well just go and unalive Seath anyway. Once you reach the archives, a lift will take you to a chamber on top of a tower. Seath will be sitting on top of an elevated platform that you cannot reach, and if you use ranged attacks, they deal no damage. Seath is invincible at this stage, and he looks the part. He is massive and almost beautiful in his own twisted way. His unnatural wings look almost like that of a butterfly. This is the only boss arena in the game that you can leave out of after entering when the boss is still alive. But this won't help you. to progress you must die to Seath. I am a bit of a sucker for the set piece that follows, but I really don't like this forced death. If you don't want to lose your souls and humanity, you're gonna need to use a Ring of Sacrifice. But if you don't have one, you're gonna have to hoof it all the way back to the arena after you've been transported very far away without dying. Feels a bit cheap and unfair. Anyway, as mentioned previously, you will be captured and taken to a jail cell, and then you must escape and proceed to explore the actual level that's in this zone. You can go back to the first arena again and Seath will still be there, but again, this doesn't help you. Once you're outside and have freed Big Hat Logan, why is he called Big Hat by the way? He will be in one of the reading rooms and will explain why Seath is immortal. It's because of something called a primordial crystal that we must destroy if we want to have a chance at him. This item is in the zone past the archives, and that's where we go to destroy the Pale Drake. If you haven't progressed Big Hat's quest as far, the cutscene when entering the arena alone makes it painfully clear what you must do. The first time round you enter, Seath crash lands once you're already past halfway across the arena, and he appears behind you, so effectively there is no obstacle to destroying the crystal. This is harder if you die and come back because Seath is already there, and you must get past him. When you do destroy the crystal, Seath gets stunned for a moment, and then you can damage him. I feel like his visual design works against the fight itself. He is massive, and I mean hulking, and you fight him on the same ground level, unlike other big bosses like Ceaseless or Four Kings. So effectively you're interacting with this big mound of unnatural and creepy looking tentacles, and all he can do is either do ranged attacks or attack you directly with those appendages. And he does not have many attacks. He can breathe out magic in various patterns, and crystals grow out where his breath went. Standing in those crystals damages you and builds up curse, but later those crystals shatter and do more damage. However, he rarely picks the right attack to hit you where you are, and usually you don't have to worry about them at all. And the other thing he will do is perform this weird writhing motion with his tentacles. Some of them move sideways, some of them slant down. It's very unpredictable and lasts very long. You also cannot really dodge those movements, and you will end up getting snagged by the limbs and carried halfway around the arena because of the spastic and erratic movements. Doesn't help that despite the arena being huge, you will still often end up stuck against a wall. This boss clearly could use more time in the oven. This kind of jank and lack of polish is usually what people criticize about the second half of Dark Souls 1. This idea with the crystals is not a bad one, but the fight is monotonous, janky, and at times can be frustrating. Not a fan. The demon ruins have been a slog so far. The entire area is just full of Taurus and Capra demons, lazily copy-pasted, standing around doing mostly nothing. There is barely any level design in this zone, and it's clear the dev team were running out of time. But since we've already made it past the horde of repeat bosses, at least I hope the main boss of the area will be a good one. Oh, you fucker! It's the fucking Stray Demon again, but he's got fire on his skin. His stats are even directly copy-pasted. So the Fire Demon is weak to fire damage. I'm way over fighting the same demon over and over again. It was a fun sequence the first time around, but each repeat was just the basic and fairly boring fight. You're getting the shaft. Piss off and don't make me look at you again. Before you enter the boss room, this guy is chilling on the side of a wall up above, inactive. When you enter the boss arena, he will wake up and float down. The arena is fairly big, but the vast majority is covered in lava, and you initially only get this small patch of ground at the entrance. The lava really hurts, so avoid stepping off. The demon will slowly approach you from the lava and sometimes throw an unpunishable extendo punch. It's basically down to RNG on when he decides to come into melee range. The gimmick of this fight is that you can cut off his long arm. It will then separate and become an independent living enemy, which can be easily killed to get the orange shard ring. Equipping this will make you almost invulnerable to lava, so if you can navigate the menu fast enough, or just die, you effectively get a massive extension of your playable space. The design of this enemy is pretty cool, but it makes the creature very hard to read and predict. He doesn't have many attacks, mainly a jumping spin and one of the least damaging grabs in the game. It's not the easiest to avoid though. There is some infamous jank in this fight. Mainly if you do a specific series of movements, he will fall out of bounds and die instantly. But if you're unlucky like me, he might jump above the arena and get stuck there. I don't have footage of this because it happened in an earlier playthrough, but he got stuck on the surface above the entrance. Every once in a while he would clip a pixel of his body through the ceiling, so I had to predict him and shoot one arrow at a time to kill him. It was harder than it might seem, because he was constantly shifting his position. This fight is pretty easy and janky, and the enemy is not very fun to fight or read. The gimmick is a nice idea, but executed poorly. I don't have strong feelings about this battle, but I don't like it either. Yep. Let's see what boss we have up next. Oh no! How much I loathe this sorry excuse for a boss fight is hard to truly put into words. So let's start with something good. I gotta say, the visual design for this fight is some of my favorite in the series. Something about the boss being a human made of tree roots looks so unnatural and scary. You can see many roots throughout Lost Isolith, and I know it was built on the base of an arch tree, so that's probably where they're from. But I like to imagine it's part of the bed of chaos growing outwards and drying out in the area. The human form, whom I believe is the Witch of Isolith herself, is initially sitting upright and then leans down to fight you in a way that looks really uncomfortable and unnatural if it were a human. As the fight progresses, a being of fire starts to coalesce above the wood, and the way it moves and sounds is really chaotic, no pun intended. The presentation makes you feel like you've reached the core, the source, of something truly horrible. But now, about the fight, there is none. I am not joking, you are not fighting anything. The fight starts with just the witch using her arms in sweeping motions to hit you. You have to run to either side of the arena and hit the glowing orb. Once you hit one, you get a cutscene, and now the Chaos Flame is emerging and can attack you as well. Now wherever you go, the ground starts crumbling in preset patterns. You have to then go to destroy the other orb, and then the fire being has fully emerged, gaining new fire-based abilities. Then you have to go to the central hole, land down on this specific route, and gain entrance to what lies beyond. And you find out that the boss is this little chaos bug that cannot do anything directly to you. And this is what's been controlling the boss this whole time. It dies in one hit and it's over. I really struggled with this fight the first time round. Mercifully, the progress you've made in regards of the orbs gets saved between attempts. However, the entire sequence is a chore. The ground crumbles in very specific patterns as you approach the danger zone. It never directly crumbles from underneath you, but the grace period can be so short that someone with slower reaction times might find it problematic. The witch's hand swipes are designed to always knock you over, and they're always physical too, so they purposely try to swat you off the map. And we know how I feel about instant kills. So the fight turns into this red light, green light bullshit where you have to wait to graciously run through the one safe path that happens to overlap with the witch's sphere of influence. You cannot roll through them, you have to just wait and suss out an opening. I don't know if I'm missing something that others know, but the last run to the central drop always takes me so long to find an opening. Every time I play, it takes entire minutes for the witch to give me enough time to run through, which is very boring if you couldn't tell. There is a firebomb cheese method where you line up two throws in the initial phase to immediately get rid of both orbs and enter the bed of chaos. But for the sake of the video footage, I decided to suffer through the intended way. The frustration I feel now when I have to fight this boss is nowhere near as hard as the first time round, but the memory alone makes it so sweet to dunk this shithead all the way down. No other boss in the entire series frustrated me as hard as this one. This guy certainly is one of the bosses of all time. Okay, so I know we all like to joke about Pinwheel, but I honestly want to talk about him seriously, because he's actually showing some promise in the few seconds he stays alive. People usually reach him after they've already obtained the Lord Vessel, and he dies really fast. It is therefore intuitive to assume that he's meant to be faced earlier, say around the time we fight Bell Gargoyles, or even further back. However, he is placed behind one of the most brutal gauntlets of skeletons, traps, and bone wheels. I never tried to go down there pre-Lord Vessel, but I can only imagine it must be the most grueling experience in the entire series. On top of all that, if you come here pre-Lord Vessel, you cannot warp out, so you need to slowly make your way all the way back through one of the most confusing labyrinths to be ever made, while of course still fighting off all the powerful enemies. And further still, the NPC summon from Pinwheel absolutely wipes the floor with him alone. So it's a complete enigma really why this boss is as weak as he is. If he stays alive for more than a few seconds, you will see he actually has some powerful attacks. He can clone himself and shoot fireballs, and so can these apparitions. The fight can become pretty chaotic and exciting quite quickly, if you let him live for a little bit. So the fight usually is uneventful, but I also can't say it's boring because of how quickly it ends. I'm putting him below middle of the road. This hulking creature of the dead will sure spook many a new player. Entering the arena makes you take a pretty chunky amount of fall damage, which feels a bit cheap. Nito, the first of the dead, will approach you from behind a central pillar. The arena is shaped like a donut, and you will probably want to stay where you came from. This is because there are many infinitely resurrecting skeletons in the arena. But if you stay on this side of the pillar, only 3 will ever aggro onto you. Of course, if you want to completely trivialize the fight, you can use a weapon with the Divine Infusion. These weapons will keep skeletons down when you kill them, and they will never resurrect. Nito himself is not a particularly threatening enemy. He barely has any combos, and all of his attacks are very slow, like he's covered in molasses. The challenge comes from being swarmed by skeletons, and honestly even the 3 minimum spooky boys you've got on you feel like too much. They're not particularly threatening, but their attacks can be pretty quick, and there's 3 of them, and plus you've got Nito on you. At least his attacks can damage the skeletons, but they don't come out often enough to make a difference. The fight feels like we're ticking down the clock. I can do my best to avoid hits, but if I want to also harm anyone, it's a tedious dance of dragging the skeletons away for one hit, and then they're already here, so I have to run away, rinse and repeat. They don't do all that much damage, but having to trade hits feels like a sloppy and slightly unfair fight, and that's why I said you're ticking down the clock. Having a divine weapon almost trivializes the entire battle, and I don't know how to feel about that. It's an interesting mechanic, but I feel it's too powerful in this specific circumstance. Outside of the boss fight, at least it doesn't rob any battle of all of its challenge. I know many people like this one, but I am not a fan. Four kings, more like anywhere between 1 and 12 kings, am I right? You can fight these monsters as soon as you kill Sif really, you're just gonna have to go through Nulondo. The descent down the spiral staircase makes it feel like you're descending into something unknown and dangerous. The fight takes place in a pitch black abyss, making it hard to gauge distances. The first king will appear shortly, and after an invisible timer ticks down, another one comes, and so on and so forth. So it is extremely advantageous to kill each king quickly. Each individual king is not that hard to fight. They have some really telegraphed sweeping attacks with their halberd things, which look and feel pretty powerful. However, their weapons do very little damage when you're up close, and full damage when you're a bit further away. I'm going to guess it's because of the lower parts of the halberds don't have a blade on them, but it still feels like a weird decision to just gimp the damage of a primarily melee boss. They have one AoE and one ranged magic attack, which is very hard to tell how close to you it really is, so that feels a bit unfair. Furthermore, dodging it once isn't enough, because it will home in on you and curve back around again. They also have the life drain grab attack, which will actually steal soft humanity from you. However, in all the times I've played this game, I haven't once managed to avoid this attack in a way other than running away, and even that requires you to have a generous head start. I do not know what I should be doing to avoid this attack, and it's annoying how unintuitive this is. The main gimmick of the fight is of course that you must focus on outputting as much DPS as possible on each individual king. This is because avoiding any more than one at a time is extremely difficult. Unlike the Gargoyles, these guys were clearly supposed to encourage you to fight them one by one, while previously the enemies were purpose-built to be fought simultaneously. Furthermore, due to some engine jank, the number of kings that appear in the fight can vary wildly in either direction, which almost makes me wonder why they bothered naming them four kings, and not something like Kings of the Abyss, which is nondescript on their actual number. In the end, I appreciate the novelty, and the kings are fairly okay enemies to fight, but I am not a huge fan of this hard DPS race sort of dynamic, because some of the most satisfying and exciting boss fights I find are where I need to avoid many cycles of attacks, ergo ones where I deal little damage and have to last long. I know many people really like them, but I can't bring myself for anything more than a good job, kiddo. The painted world of Ariamis is one of the only truly optional areas of the game, and I would actually go as far as saying it is my favorite zone of the game, mostly for its atmosphere. The boss in this area is optional for completing the game, and isn't even mandatory for leaving the place. Priscilla spouts some blatant lies, and then you can attack her to start the fight. You can also cut off her tail for a unique weapon, but this doesn't provide any tactical advantage. She will turn invisible in a blizzard, and then teleport to the edge of the arena. You can track where she is by having locked on. The camera will turn to where she teleports, but the lock-on is broken after that. The gimmick here is that you can track her movements by looking at her footprints in the snow. However, this gives precisely fuck all information on what attack she's doing. She doesn't swing her scythe all that often, but you're completely vulnerable without knowing the timings. She becomes visible again if she's poise broken, and she has very little health. When I first fought this boss, I cast Great Chaos Orb exactly 2 times, and she was dead. However, the glaring problem is that you cannot read what she's doing, and so this boss feels really unfair and frustrating to fight for me. At least she dies fast, but I don't have much to say since there is exactly one gimmick here. The ultimate thirst trap of the series, this guy does not open from the side and can only be accessed if you grab the Dark Moon Seance Ring from the catacombs and find the semi-hidden Dark Moon tomb in Anor Londo. If you choose to enter the Fog Gate, you will be expelled or unable to enter his special covenant. This is another gimmick boss, but I feel like people overstate how easy he is. The fight takes place in a seemingly infinite corridor. Gwyndolin will stay in place until you get too close, and then he will teleport further away. So effectively the fight consists of you mostly running forward while avoiding his attacks to slap him twice. Rinse and repeat. He only has 3 attacks. One of them swathes the volume around him in many slow-moving, homing magic orbs. This attack can only really be avoided by taking cover on the pillars on the sides. He can also launch a Soul Spear, which pierces through your cover, so you have to dodge anyways. The last thing he can do is fire a volley from his bow. The arrows are hard to see, and the tell for this is not very intuitive. Gwyndolin will slightly elevate himself on his tentacles to take aim. This attack can be avoided either by taking cover or side-strafing. Taking him down will usually take a few cycles despite his low health, and the 3 attacks don't make for much variety, but they all have substantially different properties and tells, which make the fight more dynamic than something like the Moonlight Butterfly. He is still very easy, but he does demand some attention. He is not the most exciting thing to fight, but it's a novel and jank-free distraction from your main quest, so I actually kind of like this guy. I'm describing the bosses in the order I fought them on this run-through, so that means we gotta tackle the DLC before the final boss, because completing the game automatically puts us into New Game Plus. This guy is placed right at the start of the expansion, and functions kind of like a skill and power check to make sure people aren't coming in here too early, because the content coming up is certainly scaled for endgame, and he acts the part. This chimera-looking thing is fast and aggressive, with headbutt combos, ranged lightning attacks, a wing move that proposes shockwave which doesn't damage you, but it can stagger your character. He has some tail attacks which will poison you, and even a fucking aerial bombardment? The Guardian doesn't have much health, so he is certainly a glass cannon. His attacks are unrelenting, and the fight feels like a constant scrap for time and control. That being said, I never personally found this fight to be all that exciting or fun. I don't really know why, but I can absolutely acknowledge that this boss is designed well above the standard of the entire game and is very challenging in a unique way. Also, when you come back to this arena having killed the boss, there will be 2 more of them standing around for some reason. They don't count as a boss and they don't drop anything special, but I find this fight too frustrating to usually go for it, as the Sanctuary Guardian was clearly not designed to be fought as a gank. Oh boy, what an absolute banger! Artorias is the ultimate swordsman boss of Dark Souls 1. He is so well remembered and beloved that similar fights in later games are often described as Artorias-like. Similarly to the Sanctuary Guardian, his aggression and speed are well above his peers. He's got sword combos for days, spinning attacks emulated by his doggo, chain somersault slams, insanely fast leaping gap closers, and an AoE that also buffs his attacks. Fighting this guy feels like trying to approach an angry bull, except he's got a fucking sword. You constantly need to mind your position relative to him, where you need to dodge, try to guess what attack he's doing based on pretty short telegraph windows. All of the telegraphs feel intuitive and fair, but the precise timing will take practice to get down. Describing him with words or video cannot do this fight justice on how intense and unique it is. You should honestly play the game just for this fight alone. He demands constant attention and focus. I actually never got all that good at this boss, and he always takes me a fair amount of tries every time I play the game. This run through, he might have humbled me the most. I didn't count but this might have been the most attempts I needed to kill him, and probably the most attempts any boss took me this run through. In fact, I even decided to swap out my base cannon for a Black Knight glaive, which I was lucky enough for it to have dropped early in the game. I'm not going to dwell too much on this small masterpiece, because only playing the game really can show you the constant joy that is this fight. But what's great is that he isn't even my favorite boss of the DLC. This guy is considered to be the final boss of the DLC, since it technically completes the main quest given to us by a talking mushroom lady. And boy, does he do justice to the entire zone of Ulasil. We've probably been to the Abyss under New Londo already, but there wasn't all that much we could glean from that escapade. Throughout the forest we've had to traverse previously, there's a big crack in the earth, from which black energy emanates, and some creepy sounds. In Ulasil we see what happened to the citizens, and we see increasingly more influence from the Abyss. We descend down into the dungeon, and forward into an underground chasm, full of humanity. At the bottom yet, we find Manus. Needless to say, the fight is climactic, and there is a sense of encountering some primal force beyond our reasoning that's been hidden beneath the earth. Manus is a hulking beast. He's got a staff in one hand, which he occasionally uses to slap us or cast magic. His other arm is absolutely massive, and always writhes with darkness. Despite his unnatural shape and constant movement, his attacks are surprisingly easy to read. I saw a video of this fight before I reached him myself, and I thought the way he attacked looked so overwhelming and hard. But when I actually reached him, I found all of this very manageable to read, although the timings of some attacks still throw me off. He initially mostly uses his big hand to attack, and he's got slams, sweeps, and an extremely long combo that will lock you in for the remaining duration if you get hit once. It's almost like a middle ground between a grab attack and a regular combo. Unfortunately, the tell for this combo is that he roars, which is easy enough to spot once you know what it does, but first time round you're not going to expect this to be the telegraph. One of his downward slams has a significant delay in his telegraph, which will catch you out initially, but you will learn the timing soon enough. Manus is fast and aggressive. He also likes to jump around for closing the gap or attacking. His animations reek of rage and aggression, and Manus almost feels like a beast to fight. In the second phase, he will also use 3 different magic spells to spice things up. One of them is like a homing rain of humanity, which I find personally really hard to avoid completely. He can also use a sort of triple shotgun blast. This one is easy enough to avoid if you're really close and can effectively rotate around him, but is basically a death sentence if you're at middle range. The last magic attack is a sort of inverse AoE, where several black orbs will appear in a circle around Manus and will rapidly close in. If you're really careful with your positioning, you can avoid it. I'm not 100% sure if rolling even works here, because this attack is really hard to avoid. There is of course a secret item called Silver Pendant, which you can find earlier in Ulasil by using the Cast Light sorcery on a fake wall. Performing an action with this item lets you deflect Manus's magic attacks if you time it correctly. I never really use it because I find fumbling around with my items and then timing the action properly to be harder than just avoiding the magic. Plus the fight is really fun this way anyway for me. The fight is exciting and challenging and is my personal favorite from Dark Souls 1. You've gotta jump through some heckin' hoops to reach this boss. First, you must find the semi-hidden key to reach Hawkeye Goth and talk to him. Then you must go to Kalameet's arena and either die once or warp out as he's coming to attack. At this stage he will only fly around and breathe fire, making him almost impossible to kill. Then you must go back to Goth and ask him for help. He will draw his massive bow and hit Kalameet with an epic no-scope air shot. Now Kalameet will be available to fight the way he's intended to be. First of all, after you take the long ladder down, the huge black dragon will emerge from behind the cliffside, and the music starts playing for one of the more grandiose entrances of the game. When you get close, you will realize Kalameet is similarly aggressive and fast as the other bosses in this expansion. And he's got some moves alright. For a big dragon, he can swipe with his head, he can fly for a bit and rain fire, he can do a spin attack which combos into a fire sweep. This attack actually feels a bit under-telegraphed in my opinion. His fire breath is black and yellow, and the animations and sounds for these attacks are really nice, and they've got some real power behind them. Kalameet doesn't feel like he's gimping himself. He does everything you would expect from a dragon. He doesn't have the best defenses for people hiding under him and smacking his butt. However, much like Sif, he will try to jump away and relocate. He also has a weird grab attack where he locks you into the air, and his red eye looking thing does something. It glows and makes a loud high-pitched noise, which might be very unpleasant for some people. But the effect of this is that now you have a debuff that makes you take double damage. This grab attack has a good telegraph, but much like the Four Kings, it's kind of unclear what the condition for getting grabbed is. But whatever it is, I almost always manage to avoid it. According to Goff, Kalameet is the last of the ancient dragons. He's also the series' first traditional dragon boss, and boy does he leave a mark. Technically we've fought dragons before, but the only other fully functioning dragon fight in the game is the Hellkite Drake, which really sucks, and is really annoying to fight. Many will imitate, but not many will match the Black Dragon. The bosses in this expansion lacked gimmick, but they are all just extremely well-crafted foes to duel. The legend himself, resting in the most crucial place for the plot of the series. You've been hearing about this fella for the entire game, and you probably expected him to be the final boss. But did that prepare you any? Gwyn might be as pure a swordsman as it gets, and I know many people consider him a joke. But I don't care what you say, Gwyn can be fucking hard! He is the only boss in the entire game that can be parried, and I think that alone is a good idea. Parrying is a high-risk, high-reward tactic that many players are not going to be skilled enough to consistently pull off. But I think it's bad design to set one expectation for the entire game, and then suddenly the last boss works differently. This sets a bit of a bad precedent for future titles, where some bosses you would expect to be parryable actually aren't, and so you are gonna be whipping out a wiki to check if it's a skill issue. Anyway, the vast majority of his attacks are very easy to parry. His grab must be rolled through, but the main problem with this entire fight is this one fucking attack. This fast slash is the bane of my existence. The telegraph is stingy with the time it gives you, but it's not impossible to roll through or parry. However, the wind-up looks almost identical to another similar but much slower attack. To avoid the fast slash, you must be ready to instantly dodge or parry when he raises his sword to his right. But if he ends up doing the slow one instead, you will get hit. So, if you're going for parrying, you cannot use a parrying dagger, which is what I prefer to use, but need to use a shield, and it must be a shield that will let you tank a hit without getting guard broken. You hold up your shield and wait for the strike. You must assume he will do the fast one, and if he doesn't, you will have just enough time to parry the slow attack. If you choose not to parry, he is a bitch to fight. He rivals the DLC bosses with his aggression, and the thrust feels a bit dodgy with how it connects. The biggest problem is the input reading. It is really noticeable on this boss. I don't know if this is the first time in the game something like this happens. But you will notice that if you press the input to heal, the very same nanosecond, Gwyn will move forward and try to attack, as if pressing the button by extension draws him towards you. It looks really unnatural and scripted. The reason I don't like this decision is because a real rival would have to see you start to heal, then decide to move in, and then still actually perform the inputs. But Gwyn in this case feels like a robot that responds to a press of a button. You can avoid a beating if you put one of the 3 columns in the arena between yourselves. But this is harder than it seems, due to Gwyn really liking to run around. Gwyn as a boss has potential, but he has some jank and unfair moves. I always enjoy fighting him, and he is one of the better bosses, but he's also far from the top. And how could I not mention the music? His theme is utterly iconic in the series, and is one of the best piano pieces I've ever heard. So, thanks for listening to me talk about my washed opinions on a game I love. For all the shit talking I do, I really mean it when I say that I like the boss lineup in this game, but it is also by far the jankiest of the lot, and some of the bad apples really spoil the bunch. So thanks for watching the video. If this one gets any attention at all, I'm going to continue on to Dark Souls 2 and further along. I haven't been making many serious YouTube videos, so any positive feedback will really encourage me. I'll be seeing you later.